They thought they could throw me out of my own home. But I didn't fight back. I just bought the house across the street and watched karma move in. Hit subscribe still because some revenge stories aren't loud, they're legendary. They say a man's home isn't just where he sleeps, it's where his memories live. And for me, that home was a small white house at the end of Oak Ridge Lane, a quiet street where the mailman still waved and the sound of sprinklers filled the summer mornings. I bought that house 40 years ago with my wife Martha. Back then we didn't have much, just two young hearts, a beat-up truck and a dream. But together we turned those four walls into a life. The creaky staircase carried our laughter. The kitchen walls heard every argument and every, "I'm sorry." We raised our son Daniel there. I can still see him running through the backyard, chasing the neighbor's dog, coming in covered in mud, while Martha yelled from the porch. Those were the golden days, the kind of memories that make a man forget about the storms waiting ahead. Time moved fast, too fast. Daniel grew up, left for college, and I got older. Martha's health started to slip, and one winter evening, she was gone. No drama, no warning, just gone. After she passed, that house became both my comfort and my cage. Her smell lingered in the curtains. Her laughter echoed in every empty room. I'd sit on the porch at sunset with 2 cups of tea out of habit, one for me, one for her, and just stare at the horizon, wondering how life could feel so full and empty at the same time. Then one day Daniel called. He sounded worried, like most sons do when they realize their old man isn't indestructible anymore. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone," he said. "I've talked to Sam. We want you to move in with us. You'll have your own room. Emily would love to have her grandpa around." Samantha, his wife. I didn't know her well then, but she seemed kind enough. Polite smile, firm handshake, eyes that didn't quite match the warmth in her voice. Still, I wanted to believe she meant well. I wanted to believe they both did. So I agreed. I packed up my life into a few boxes, old photo frames, some tools, a few books Martha loved. When I closed the front door of that white house, I remember turning the key and whispering, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be back someday." I didn't know why I said it. Maybe part of me knew that chapter wasn't truly over. At first, living with Daniel and Samantha wasn't so bad. They had a beautiful home, modern furniture, and all the conveniences I'd given up for simplicity. I tried to adjust, kept to myself, helped with small chores, even offered to teach Daniel how to fix the old truck he barely drove anymore. But soon the cracks started to show. Samantha was polite at first, but she had rules. "Dad, you can't leave the lights on," she said one evening. "And please, don't go into the basement." Little things at first that felt like reminders that I was an outsider in my own son's house. Then came the suggestions. "Maybe you don't need all these old tools anymore. Dad, that chair doesn't match our living room. Why keep those dusty photo albums? Throw them away." I kept quiet. I smiled, I nodded. A week later, I realized just how much they'd decided for me. My belongings were disappearing. One by one. My tools, my books, my old armchair, all gone. When I asked, Daniel shrugged. "We're just trying to make things easier for you, Dad." And that's when I realized this wasn't about care, this was control. They had moved in the moment I trusted them to take care of me, but really they were clearing the path to take over everything I'd built. I had been patient, I had been polite, I had been a good father, and yet somehow I'd become invisible in my own life. I could have argued, I could have fought, but I knew one thing, and revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, strategic, and in my case, it was about to get legendary. The next morning I called my lawyer. Simple conversation, simple request. "I want to buy the house across the street, every detail, every corner, every square foot." Daniel laughed when I told him. "Why would you do that, Dad? That's your neighbor's house." I smiled, calmly. Because sometimes the best view of karma is from your own porch. It didn't take long. Within days, the purchase was finalized. The house across the street was mine, every corner, every window, every inch of lawn, all under my control. Daniel and Samantha didn't take it seriously at first. "You're just buying a neighbor's house," Daniel said smugly, when he saw me unpack a few boxes of personal belongings. "What's the point?" The point, I realized, was perspective. I started small. Every morning I would sit on my porch quietly observing. I planted flowers in the front yard, bright red roses that seemed to bloom just for the view. I mowed the lawn meticulously, kept the driveway immaculate, and added a small mailbox just like the one Daniel had always complained about being outdated. Samantha's complaints began almost immediately. "Dad, it's so close to our house. It blocks the sunlight in our yard." "They're just flowers, Sam," I said, smiling. "But thank you for noticing." Then came the subtle moves, a new mailbox post perfectly aligned with their driveway, a small rock garden that caught the morning sun and gleamed into their living room, just enough to remind them I was there. Every little detail was intentional, quiet, calculated. Neighbors started noticing. Friends I'd known for decades waved and stopped to chat. "Nice flowers," they'd say. "Such a beautiful yard." And each time, Daniel's face would tighten with frustration. Samantha would whisper, "This is ridiculous." One evening, Daniel tried to confront me. "Why are you doing this? You're making a scene." "I'm not," I said calmly. "I'm just living my life right here, right across the street." And that's when it hit them. Karma doesn't shout, it doesn't announce itself, it simply arrives quietly, persistently, until it can't be ignored. By the end of the month, their complaints had turned to grudging respect. They couldn't ignore the fact that I'd reclaimed control, not through anger, not through fights, but through patience, strategy, and quiet determination. I hadn't needed to yell. I hadn't needed to storm in and take back what was mine. I just needed a view, a porch, and the calm satisfaction of watching karma move in. Sometimes the loudest revenge is the one you don't hear. Weeks passed, and life settled into a quiet rhythm. I'd sit on my porch with a cup of coffee each morning, watching the neighborhood wake up. The same street, the same houses, but now with a sense of balance restored. Daniel and Samantha finally stopped complaining. They avoided direct confrontation and, surprisingly, even started greeting me politely when they left for work. They couldn't deny the truth. I wasn't just their neighbor anymore. I was a force they had underestimated. It wasn't about the flowers, the mailbox, or the perfectly trimmed lawn. It was about respect, about showing that no one could take what you built, your memories, your home, your peace, without consequence. Sometimes I'd catch Samantha glancing across the street, her expression a mix of annoyance and awe. Daniel would shake his head, muttering something about stubbornness, but I just smiled. I didn't need their validation. Karma had already spoken. And as the sun set behind Oak Ridge Lane, casting long shadows over both houses, I realized something important. Victory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, grows quietly, and blooms through cracks you never thought could hold anything. Some revenge stories are loud, some are quiet. But the ones that are legendary, they're the ones that unfold while the world is watching, and you're just living your life. Months went by, and life on Oak Ridge Lane found its natural rhythm again. The roses in my garden bloomed brighter than ever, and the porch felt alive with mornings spent reading, sipping coffee, and watching Emily run across the lawn. Daniel grew closer, visiting often, bringing Emily along. He'd finally begun to understand what it meant to value family over appearances, patience over control. And Samantha. She stayed behind her curtains more often, silent, unable to ignore the quiet power of what I had rebuilt. Not just a house, but respect and dignity. I realized then that revenge isn't about destruction. It isn't about shouting, plotting, or confrontation. True revenge comes from living better, standing tall, protecting your peace, and letting others watch it unfold. Every time Samantha glanced across the street, she saw a life she couldn't erase. A man who refused to break, a man who transformed betrayal into balance, pain into purpose, and silence into strength. That's the kind of victory no one regrets. The kind that doesn't destroy, it restores. And for me, as I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip behind the houses, I whispered quietly to Martha's picture. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of understanding. And sometimes the sweetest victory is simply living well, quietly, and fully. Months passed, and life on Oak Ridge Lane felt steady, almost timeless. Emily had grown more confident, Daniel more aware, and I more at peace than I had been in decades. The house across the street stood as a silent reminder to Samantha that life can't be forced, only lived. Occasionally I'd catch her glancing toward my porch, her expression unreadable, as if realizing too late that respect and presence can't be faked or controlled. But that didn't matter. I didn't seek her approval. I had already built a life defined by my own terms. And sometimes late at night, I'd sit in my favorite chair, Martha's photo on the table, Emily asleep upstairs, and whisper, "We did it, sweetheart. We built a life worth protecting. We stood quietly, and still we won." It was a quiet victory, the kind that doesn't make headlines but changes lives. A victory measured not in power over others, but in peace, dignity, and the strength to remain unbroken. The White House on Oak Ridge Lane had once been just walls and memories. Now it was a testament to patience, to resilience, and to the quiet art of living well, no matter the storms around you. And in that calm I finally understood. The true measure of strength isn't in the battles you fight loudly, but in the life you build quietly, and the peace you protect, always. Years later, Emily would tell me she remembered everything. The small victories, the quiet defiance, the way we never gave up on our home or each other. She'd say it shaped who she became, someone strong, compassionate, and unafraid to stand her ground with dignity. Sometimes strangers would walk by and comment on the garden, the house, the way it all seemed alive. I'd just smile, knowing they couldn't see the full story. They couldn't know the silent battles, the whispered victories, the lessons learned in quiet corners of life. And on rare evenings, I'd look across the street at Samantha's house, now just another home, another family. I felt no anger, only a calm satisfaction. Karma doesn't always roar. Sometimes it blooms quietly, like roses through a fence. Life had taught me something simple. Strength isn't about revenge, control, or proving others wrong. It's about protecting what matters, nurturing what you love, and letting time reveal the rest. And so Oak Ridge Lane remained more than just a street. It was a story of patience, resilience, and the quiet power of living true. And so life went on. The house stood tall, the garden bloomed, and the porch lights glimmered every evening. Daniel visited more often. Emily ran across the yard laughing, and I finally felt at peace. I learned that true victory isn't about making someone else lose. It's about standing firm, living with dignity, and letting your actions speak louder than words. Quiet strength, patience, and presence. That's the revenge that lasts. Sometimes the world will try to erase you, but the ones who truly matter, they notice. And when you protect your peace, you don't just survive, you thrive. And on Oak Ridge Lane, that lesson wasn't lost on anyone. As the sun set over Oak Ridge Lane, I sat on my porch sipping coffee, listening to the quiet hum of life around me. No confrontation, no shouting, no drama, just peace. Sometimes people think revenge means anger or destruction, but the kind of revenge that truly matters is calm, patient, and unwavering. It's about living your life fully, with dignity, and letting the truth shine quietly. And in that silence, Samantha finally saw what she couldn't control. Me, my life, my home, my peace. I smiled at the sunset, whispered to Martha's photo, and knew she was right. The quiet ones always win, not because they shout, but because they never lose themselves. The porch light flickered softly. The roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. And for the first time in years, I truly slept well at night. Weeks passed, and life on Oak Ridge Lane settled into a new rhythm. Daniel and Emily visited often, laughter returning to the old White House. The neighbors smiled, waved, and shared stories again. Samantha's house across the street became quiet. Her control and perfection faded, not because I fought, but because truth and patience always outlast force. I tended my garden, drank coffee on the porch, and watched Emily run freely, feeling the warmth of home surround us. And in that calm, I realized the deepest lesson. Revenge isn't about making others lose. It's about reclaiming yourself, your dignity, and your peace. Sometimes, the quietest victories are the ones that leave the loudest impact. And that was mine. Months turned into years, and life remained steady. Daniel found balance in his own home, Emily grew up visiting often, and I finally felt completely at peace. Sometimes Samantha would glance across the street, a reminder that control is fleeting, but integrity and patience endure. I'd learned that true strength doesn't come from force or anger. It comes from quiet resilience, from living your life fully while others try to erase you. And as the sun set on Oak Ridge Lane each evening, I smiled, knowing that the real victory wasn't about payback. It was about life reclaimed, dignity restored, and peace earned. The quiet ones always win, not with noise, but with presence. And that was my triumph. Life settled into a quiet rhythm. Daniel spent more time on my porch, helping with small repairs, talking, laughing with Emily. The neighborhood had accepted me back as one of their own. My house stood proudly, restored, alive with memories and peace. Samantha stayed mostly inside her new home. Her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. She realized slowly that she couldn't erase me, or the life I had built. I spent my mornings tending the garden, afternoons reading, evenings watching the sun set behind Oak Ridge Lane. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to prove anything. My presence alone told the story of patience, dignity, and quiet strength. One afternoon, Emily ran across the street, holding a drawing of our two houses, hearts drawn between them. She looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, I'm glad you're here. It feels like home again." And I realized that was the victory. Not humiliation, not revenge, but peace restored, respect regained, and life lived fully. Samantha's attempts to control and erase me had failed. The quiet ones always win, not through noise, anger, or confrontation, but through presence, patience, and unwavering dignity. That night, as the porch light glowed softly and the street settled into stillness, I whispered to Martha's old photo, "You were right, sweetheart. The quiet ones win in the end, not because they shout, but because they never lose themselves." And with that I finally slept, content, unbothered, victorious. Weeks passed, and Oak Ridge Lane began to feel like it always had, a place of comfort, memories, and simple joys. Kids rode bikes, neighbors waved, and the mailman still tipped his hat as he passed. Emily started planting her own flowers in the yard, following the trail I had begun. Red roses, bright and bold, stretching toward the sun. She looked at me one afternoon and said, "Grandpa, one day these will bloom as tall as the fence." I smiled, realizing that my legacy wasn't just the house. It was the life and love I nurtured in it. The walls held laughter, lessons, and memories that no fence, no bitterness, no money could erase. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over both houses on Oak Ridge Lane, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeful. It was living fully, loving freely, and letting life take its natural course. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is simply peace, presence, and the life you deserve. Years later, Oak Ridge Lane had changed, but some things stayed the same. My white house stood proud, the roses had flourished, and laughter still echoed from both homes across the street. Sometimes I'd sit in my favorite chair, watch the world go by, and think about all the people who tried to push me out. I didn't fight, I didn't yell, I simply lived. And in that living, I found something they never could take away: peace, dignity, and a life truly my own. Because the real victory isn't in proving them wrong, it's in proving yourself right. And as the wind rustled the rose petals and the sun set gently over Oak Ridge Lane, I knew one thing for certain. Life has its way of balancing things out, quietly, beautifully, and perfectly. Epi,